Sweetheart, we need you to move out of the guest house by the end of the month. We're converting it into a home office for your brother-in-law. You understand, don't you? My mother-in-law said this the way someone mentions the weather. Casual. Over brunch. While refilling her coffee, I set down my fork. My husband, seated right beside me, said nothing. He reached for the breadbasket instead. I looked at him for a full 3 seconds, waiting. Nothing. So I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly on the table, and said, of course. They thought that was me agreeing. It wasn't. It was the first move. Have you ever watched people underestimate you so completely that you almost felt sorry for them? Almost. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Noelle. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been married into a family that has never once let me forget that I was, in their words, a lucky girl who married up. My husband, Connor, comes from what his mother calls old money, though anyone who's seen their actual balance sheets would call it something else entirely. His younger brother, Fletcher, is the one they orbit around like a second son. He's 26, has never held a job longer than 8 months. And somehow that's always someone else's fault. I grew up in a small town in eastern Ohio. My parents were school teachers. We weren't poor, but we weren't the kind of family that had a guest house. When Connor and I got married, I thought his family's stiffness toward me was just nerves, the initial friction of a new daughter-in-law. 4 years later, I understood it wasn't nerves. It was a decision they'd made before they'd ever learned my last name. The guest house thing was just the latest chapter. Before that, it was the Christmas where my mother-in-law handed me a gift card to a grocery store while everyone else got jewelry. Before that, it was Fletcher's engagement party, where I spent 6 hours helping set up the venue and wasn't included in a single family photo. Before that, it was the job. Connor's family owned a mid-sized commercial real estate firm, Hartwell Property Group. When my father-in-law mentioned offhandedly that they needed someone to handle their asset compliance work, I offered to help. I had the credentials. I'd been doing commercial lease compliance and financial auditing for nearly 5 years at that point. My father-in-law laughed, not mean, just dismissive. We'll find someone in-house, sweetheart. 2 months later, Fletcher was given a title, a salary, and a corner office, despite having no background in real estate, finance, or anything adjacent to either. That was fine. I had my own work. What they never asked about, because it never occurred to them to ask, was where I worked. Connor knew, of course. But to his family, I was a woman who did something with numbers, which they found both boring and irrelevant. They didn't know the name of my firm. They didn't know my clearance level. They didn't know that my specialty was something very specific, commercial real estate transaction compliance and forensic lease auditing. I reviewed deals worth tens of millions of dollars. I found fraud that other people missed. I was, without exaggerating, very good at what I did. And Hartwell Property Group was one of 6 companies currently under a regional compliance review that my firm had been quietly contracted to assist with. I didn't know that when I married Connor. By the time I found out, the case was already assigned to me by name. I flagged it immediately to my senior partner. He reviewed the situation and told me that because I had no financial stake in the company, had never been employed by them, and had maintained a documented professional separation, there was no legal conflict. I could stay on the case. I was required to disclose my relationship to the company's principals internally, which I did in writing 3 months before the brunch where my mother-in-law told me to vacate the guest house. That morning, after brunch, I drove home to our house, not the guest house. We didn't live in it. I was simply using it as a secondary workspace because it was quiet and had good light. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the Hartwell compliance file. I had been building it for 7 months. I want to explain something about how fraud works in family-owned real estate businesses, because it matters for understanding what I found. In small to mid-sized firms, the person with the weakest oversight is almost always the one with the most family protection. No one scrutinizes the owner's son. No one asks the golden child for documentation. That's how Fletcher had been able to do what he was doing for nearly 2 years without anyone catching it. He was running a double billing scheme on tenant improvement allowances. If you're not in commercial real estate, here's the simple version. When a company leases office space, the landlord sometimes gives them money to renovate the space to fit their needs. That's a TI allowance. Fletcher was submitting invoices for renovation work to both the tenants and to Hartwell's internal accounts, collecting the same money twice. He'd set up a contractor entity, a single-member LLC registered in his girlfriend's name in Delaware, and was routing duplicate payments through it. The LLC had a professional-looking website, a phone number that went to voicemail, and no employees. The total across 11 properties over 22 months was just under $340,000. He was also expensing personal items through the company, which was almost quaint by comparison. $12,000 in furniture, a boat slip rental, 2 international flights. Rounding errors practically, next to the TI scheme. But they were documented. They were part of the file. I printed everything the night before a scheduled family dinner. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go looking for this because his mother told me to vacate the guest house. I didn't do it out of spite. I was assigned this case through proper channels. I did my job. What I chose, what was entirely within my discretion, was the timing and the method of delivery. The dinner was at my in-laws' home. A family celebration, my mother-in-law had called it, because Fletcher had just closed his first significant lease deal. A company, something in tech, had signed a long-term lease on one of Hartwell's downtown properties. The family was celebrating like he brokered peace in the Middle East. My father-in-law had rented out the private room at one of the nicer restaurants in the city. There were flowers. There was a seating chart. There was a framed photo of Fletcher at the signing, centered on the table like an icon. Connor and I arrived together. I was wearing a navy wrap dress I'd bought specifically for this. My husband held the door open for me and whispered that I looked beautiful. I thanked him. I had told him nothing. I need to say that plainly. Connor is not a bad man. He is a man who had spent his entire life learning not to see what his family did not want seen. That is its own kind of damage, and it wasn't mine to fix that night. Fletcher was already there, holding court at the bar with his girlfriend. He saw me walk in and did the thing he always did. A quick look over, a slight smile, the kind that communicates you are tolerated here. I smiled back. I found my seat. My mother-in-law stood up early in the dinner to give a small toast. She talked about Fletcher's potential, his vision, his instincts for the business. She talked about how proud the family was. She looked at my father-in-law. She looked at Fletcher. She looked at Connor. She did not look at me. I drank my water. Then my father-in-law stood up. He had an announcement, he said. Effective the 1st of next month, Fletcher would be named VP of Acquisitions. He was being given a significant equity stake in the company. Because, my father-in-law said, raising his glass, this family bets on its own. Fletcher grinned. His girlfriend covered her mouth with her hand in staged surprise. Connor clapped. My mother-in-law was crying. Actual tears. I reached down to my bag under the chair and removed a cream-colored envelope. I had addressed it by hand. On the front, I had written, "Congratulations." I waited until the applause had settled. Then I leaned across the table and placed it in front of my father-in-law. I have something for the occasion, I said. He looked at it, then at me, smiled the way he always smiled at me, patient, condescending. What's this, sweetheart? It's your advance copy, I said. The formal version goes to your board and to the regional compliance office Monday morning. The table went quiet in that specific way that only happens when something real has entered the room. My father-in-law opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read the first page. The smile faded. Then he flipped to the second page. Then he stopped flipping. What is this, he said, not a question. That's 22 months of duplicate TI billing across 11 properties, I said. The invoicing entity is a Delaware LLC registered to Fletcher's girlfriend. The routing account ties back to his personal banking. The total is $341,000. I paused. The supporting documentation for the personal expense misappropriation starts on page 38. The room had gone so silent I could hear the kitchen on the other side of the wall. Fletcher pushed back from the table. This is insane. She's making things up. She's headed up for this family since day one. Fletcher. My father-in-law's voice was flat. Dad, she's been trying to tear this family apart. Fletcher. Harder this time? My mother-in-law turned to me, and her voice was shaking. How could you do this to us? You are family. I work for Meridian Compliance Group, I said. I've been the assigned auditor on the Hartwell Compliance Review for the past 7 months. I disclosed my relationship to your family to my senior partner in writing before I was ever in this room. My job is to find what I found. I did my job. She's lying, Fletcher said, but it came out thinner this time. He looked at his girlfriend. She was staring at the tablecloth. Connor was looking at me, not with anger, with something I hadn't seen on his face in a long time, something closer to clarity. My mother-in-law was crying again. Different tears now. My father-in-law set the envelope down. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Fletcher, and I think, in that moment, whatever fiction he had been maintaining about his younger son simply ran out of room. I didn't stay for dessert. I picked up my bag, pushed in my chair, and said goodnight. Connor followed me out without a word. In the car, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you known?" "I've been building the case for 7 months," I said, "but I suspected something was wrong before that. The TI discrepancies showed up in a routine review. It wasn't hard to find once someone was actually looking." "Why didn't you tell me?" I turned to look at him. "Would you have wanted to know?" He didn't answer. We both understood what that meant. The formal report was filed Monday morning, as I had said it would be. By Tuesday, 2 of Hartwell's major investors had requested an emergency board meeting. By Thursday, 3 of the 11 affected tenants had been contacted by the compliance office. Fletcher retained a criminal defense attorney by Friday. The Delaware LLC was dissolved the same day, though that was more of a symbolic gesture than a practical one. The documentation was already in the file. Fletcher was terminated from Hartwell. The equity transfer my father-in-law had announced at dinner was reversed before it was ever finalized. The criminal matter is ongoing, and I won't speculate on how it resolves, but the evidence is what it is, and the people reviewing it are not family members. The guesthouse conversation, the one that had started all of this in motion, the one where my mother-in-law told me to be out by the end of the month because Fletcher needed the space, turned out to matter in a specific way I hadn't anticipated. Because when Connor and I sat down with our own attorney 3 weeks later, it came up. The guest house was on a parcel technically included in the property deed of the main family home, and Connor had a legal interest in that property through his grandfather's estate, the same estate that Fletcher had been quietly pressuring my father-in-law to restructure in his favor for the past 2 years. Our attorney sent a letter. The guesthouse conversation, which my mother-in-law had casually floated over coffee and eggs, was now documented as part of a broader pattern of exclusion that had direct bearing on Connor's estate interests. We weren't vindictive about it. We just made sure the record was complete. I'll tell you what I didn't expect. I didn't expect to feel as calm as I did through all of it. I kept waiting for guilt, or second-guessing, or some moment where I'd wonder if I'd gone too far. It never came. What I had done was file an accurate compliance report at the end of a 7-month professional investigation. Every fact in that file was verifiable. Every number was documented. The dinner was theater, yes. The timing was intentional. But the substance? The substance was just math. What I also didn't expect was Connor. In the weeks after, something shifted in him. It was slow, not dramatic. He started asking questions he'd never asked before, about his family, about himself, about the years he'd spent rearranging his vision to keep certain things out of frame. He started seeing a therapist. He apologized to me, not once in a big speech but in pieces, over time, which felt more real. He told me that the moment in the car, when he'd asked why I hadn't told him, and I'd asked whether he would have wanted to know, was the question that had been living in him for years, and he hadn't known how to let it out. We're still together. That's not a triumphant announcement. It's just true. We're working on things, both of us, in the way that two people work on things, when they've decided that what they're building together is worth the effort. My mother-in-law called me once, about 2 months after the dinner. She didn't apologize. She asked me if I felt good about what I'd done to her family. I told her that I had done my job, that I was sorry it had landed the way it did, and that I hoped Fletcher would be okay. She hung up. My father-in-law sent a brief email. He said he wished things had gone differently. I believed him, and I wrote back to say so. The guest house is still there. No one has turned it into anything. I still use it sometimes, when I need the quiet and the light. I sit at the small desk by the window, open my laptop, and work on whatever case comes across my desk next. My mother-in-law once told me, at a Thanksgiving I've mostly tried to forget, that I would never really be part of this family because I didn't understand what it meant to protect your own. She meant it as an insult. She meant to draw a line between us, between the people who matter and the one who doesn't. She was right that I didn't understand it the way she did. I didn't protect people because they were blood. I protected what was true. And it turned out that was the thing her family needed most, even if they never once asked me for it. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the dinner, not the envelope. It's earlier than that, it's the brunch. The way Connor's mother refilled her coffee while she told me to vacate the guest house. The complete ease of it. She didn't think she was doing anything wrong. That's the part that used to bother me. Now I think it's actually the most important detail in the whole story. People who operate the way she did, the way Fletcher did, they don't think they're doing something wrong because they've never had to. When no one checks the math gets messier every year. When no one holds you accountable, you start to believe accountability is something that only applies to other people. Fletcher didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal $340,000. He woke up every morning in a family that had spent 26 years telling him the rules were negotiable for him specifically. That's not an excuse, it's just how it works. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, not the kind of thing you say because it sounds right, but the kind that settles into your chest after months of sitting with it, is that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same action. I could have recused myself from the Hartwell case the moment I saw the name. Nobody would have blamed me. I could have stayed quiet at that dinner, folded the envelope back into my bag, smiled through the toast. I could have kept the peace. I'd been keeping the peace for 4 years already. I knew how. But here's what keeping the peace had actually cost me. My work was invisible to them, because I had made it invisible. My competence was invisible, because I had never forced them to see it. I had been so careful not to make them uncomfortable that I had accidentally confirmed everything they believed about me. That I was small. That I was manageable. That I didn't matter very much. The night I placed that envelope on the table, I wasn't being reckless. I was being precise. 7 months of documentation, every number verified, every claim sourced. That kind of work doesn't happen on instinct alone. It requires the discipline to keep going on days when you're tired, on days when you wonder if it even matters, on days when you're sitting across from your mother-in-law at Thanksgiving and she's saying things that make your jaw tighten, and you have to keep your face completely still. That steadiness, that refusal to cut corners even when no one would notice, that's what made the work unassailable. Fletcher's attorney had nothing to work with because there was nothing to work with. I think about Connor, too. About the way he asked why I hadn't told him. About the real question underneath that question, which was, why did I think he couldn't handle it? The honest answer is that I wasn't sure he could, and that uncertainty was its own kind of truth about where we were. What's changed since then isn't that everything got easier, it's that we stopped pretending things were fine when they weren't. That's harder in the short term and better in every other way. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, it's not that you should wait for the perfect moment to expose someone. It's something smaller and more daily than that. It's that the way you do your work when nobody's watching is exactly what you'll have to stand behind when everybody is. I stood behind mine. It held.